Good evening. It's nice to meet you. My name is Atlas Example Student. I use he, him pronouns, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your possibly very busy schedule to be conducting this interview. Now, the prompt I've been presented with is discussing a situation where a friend bought a piece of very expensive electronic equipment about 2 weeks ago that unfortunately stopped working. However, the store that he bought it from has a 7-day return policy, but he kind of appeared to do a switch with a new version of the product and then return the old one that was expired past the area of return to get a full refund. However, this store also appears to be owned by my uncle who's really struggling to keep his business going, and how I would deal with that situation. So before I really delve deep into the processes that I would take to ensure that there's a good solution here for everybody, I want to quickly summarize the framework I would use. And to begin, I would want to start by acknowledging the conflict, and then take a moment to acknowledge the emotional weight of both perspectives, move into some more actionable solutions, and also gaining information about what everyone's perspective is in the situation. Then talk about ways that I could help everybody involved and how these learnings will also relate to my future practice as a physician. So, with that, let's circle back to the beginning. I want to start, like I mentioned, by acknowledging the conflict. Here, I'm dealing with two people that I'm gonna care about very, very deeply. One being my friend and one being my uncle. These are likely, or these very likely, both people in my life that have been there for me when times are hard, when things are tough, and have put their necks out for me when I really needed their help. And being able to return that favor to both of them is something that I don't take lightly at all, as finding really good and strong friends and family members in this world is something beautiful, and I want to hold on to that as best as I possibly can. And with that, I also want to take the emotional perspectives of both parties into account here. I can't imagine what it would be like to have spent $3,000 on a really expensive item that maybe I've really been looking forward to, and it just stops working. And then knowing that I've passed the return policy and there's seemingly no accountability. But also, I can't imagine what it would be like to put my all into starting an electronics store and business, and then having someone pull a bait and switch on me. And I lost that revenue in a time when I'm already really struggling. So those are both things to keep in mind and hold in the scenario as we continue to move forward. Now, this is where I come in. And the first thing I would really want to do is undertake some damage control. And the case where this would be applicable is if that $3,000 loss is going to cause my uncle's business to immediately go under due to outstanding loans, lack of rent, or if there is a tax discrepancy for, in the filings that may be going on at a certain time of year. If that's the case, I would do my absolute best to seek for further funding or a bailout from the Canadian Small Business Association, or possibly in turn my own funds if I'm, privileged enough to have those available. However, if time isn't as of the essence, I would take a more broad and nuanced approach. And that would really begin with figuring out the motivations of my friend to pull this bait and switch of the policy. The key that I really want to get to the crux of is my friend really struggling for money and just upset, or are they acting out of a more, seemingly rash place? And I can't make that assumption right away. So I really need to delve deep and explore if they're, just feeling, more upset and maybe done wrong by, or if they're acting out of a more malicious intent. And really gaining that picture is going to help me figure out a way to move forward. And also try and create an environment where communication about this unfortunate situation is possible. And this also relates to the perspective of the uncle. It's possible my friend has absolutely no idea that my uncle is really struggling to keep this store open. And maybe because, they're both, people who I really value in my life, maybe they have a personal relationship too. And I could call upon that to really make actionable and change that works for everybody involved. And that would be the ideal situation in this case. However, circling back a little bit, if I found that, maybe communication didn't happen just because they were upset, but they were both open to really working towards a solution, I would gather a bit of a round table where I could help mediate, and then both of them could, come to a table and really discuss in an open and empathetic way how they might be able to move forward. And the way that I would create an environment where tensions can be low is by calling upon something I dub the art of being with. And what that really necessitates is just making sure that everybody's nervous systems are calm by lowering our breathing rates and heart rates, and also using compassionate speech and knowing that, hey, everybody in this room really cares about each other, either directly or by proxy because of my presence, and that we can all work together to create a solution that works for everybody. However, if things were done out of a more malicious intent on the part of my friend upon the return, I would really take a pause with him and ask him what was underneath that and why he was feeling these, feelings of anger and how we could work to resolve them. And it would again circle back to that communication. So if I was able to create that space again, I could then move forward into that meeting and hopefully create the resolution. And aside from that, too, I would also really want to inspect how I could help my uncle irrespective of the return policy situation. If he's struggling, I really have, both a duty as a family member and a real desire to see the people I love succeed. And because of that, I would likely again circle back to the items that I thought about in damage control. Maybe recommending him to an investor or anybody possible who's able to receive funding to really keep that store open. And if this is his dream to, really sell the best and brightest electronics in the area, allow him to go and do that. And really calling upon these multifaceted perspectives is going to be something crucial for my practice as a future physician, where I'm going to be mediating conflicts between patients and families, and also sometimes differing perspectives between members of my team and the way that we're going to be caring for the patients who ultimately do come first in that scenario. So, with all these things in mind, do you have any further questions about how I would handle a tough and complex situation like this one?
Yes, thank you. How would your approach be different if the item was a fridge and your friend did nothing wrong for it to break? You know, your friend bought it, it's supposed to last 10 years at least, and it broke within a month. And your friend swears to God that he did not do anything wrong with the fridge.
That's an excellent question. I think the fridge part may be irrespective of the strategy, unless the cost is approximately the same. If it's majorly different and it's a very cheap fridge, it might be easier to resolve. But if it's the same amount of expense, I think the key would then come down to a crux of fairness, because my friend is no longer performing this bait and switch action. So it would make sense that there should be, a way for him to, justly receive that piece of equipment that he paid for with money he probably worked very hard to get, and he's deserving of that as the customer. However, I still need to really ensure that my uncle is, able to keep their business open and allow their life and livelihood to thrive. So again, it would really circle back to ensuring that my friend got that fair deal, and maybe I could use my own possible funds if needed, and also continue to recommend those damage control resources to a struggling business to ensure they're able to really make those amends on, return policies such as this. And that keeps the customer happy and also all the personal relations that I really care about intact. And I think that's the main key. So irrespective of the piece of equipment, I really want to focus on fairness and supporting the people in this situation that matter most to me. So with that, thank you very much for allowing me the space to speak and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much. Good evening. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Atlas Example Student. I use he, him pronouns, and I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day to be conducting this interview. Now, the prompt here is asking me about the importance of cultural humility in the treatment of Indigenous patients and how I would approach these practices, excuse me, in the future of my care. And to really show how I would encompass the various facets that go into this, I want to give a quick summary of the answer I would provide. And to begin, I really want to focus on the history of the Indigenous experience and how it relates to the modern day, talk about the emotional component of how people show up in healthcare clinics, and then move into some more actionable solutions about things that are both personal and policy related and how those are going to play into my future practice as a physician. So let's circle back to the start. To begin, I want to start by acknowledging the history of the Indigenous experience and the weight that that carries. In the lands in which we're inhabiting today, there is a history that is, approximately 500 years long of the creation and perpetration of systems that have really worked to both devalue the indigenous identity and in many cases try to erase it entirely. And one can really cite to the institutional structures that have made these things happen. For example, the residential school system that many people can call upon, which very shockingly, the last one only ended up closing in the term of 1996 to 1997, which is an extraordinarily recent timeline. We can also look to things like the 60s scoop and millennial scoop, where indigenous children through the 60s to 80s were taken away by the foster care system in these areas, and then placed in inhabitants with non-indigenous families in an attempt to change their culture. And all of these items also play into the way social determinants of health are spread through indigenous communities, which have been chronically underfunded by their local governments, which is a very unfortunate outcome. And what this has led to is the perpetration of intergenerational trauma, which still sticks with us today. And because of that emotional weight, which, for example, I can't possibly imagine what it would be like to have a system and a government come after the very core of who I am when I have this right to, self-determinate and live in the way that I see fit and is beautiful to the world. And to have that stripped away from me is, very validly going to create a state of distrust and fear. And that's part of the cultural paradigm that comes with us today. And that's something that, as a physician, especially one who isn't Indigenous, really has a responsibility to try and, both combat but also future-proof to really look forward and move that needle forward so everyone who comes to me can feel safe, heard, and understood. And that's really the beginning crux of what I want to explore. And it's something I was very lucky to be able to explore, excuse me. And I had a very chance meeting with a seventh generation Cree pound maker chief at a event called Nova Scotia Music Week, where I was playing drums, which is one of my great passions outside of medicine that I really enjoy and have been doing for a past decade. And a lot of the musical experience I've had have shaped my perspectives going into this field. And this is one of those experiences. And I was able to have a conversation with this chief and really ask them, how can I, as a white practitioner, try my best to honor the Indigenous experience? And what they told me really stuck with me. And it's that in Indigenous culture, lived experience is one of the highest forms of evidence. So, of course, I can't just have that lived experience as a Caucasian person. But what I can do is really sit and believe the Indigenous story and hear it and value it. And that's one of the main things that I'm going to be striving to do here and is part of my cultural humility. And you might be asking, hey, student, how are you going to do that? Like, that's great and all, but what are your methods? And to do that, I want to call upon something I dub the art of being with. And that really focuses on the ability to calm our nervous systems and really focus on the person in front of us and show them with both language and body language that we are on their team. And also acknowledge the bravery that it may have taken to come to a clinical setting like this where they may not have that trust and see that trauma, acknowledge that it's there, but also be willing and open to move forward from that. And then now you might be asking, how do we move forward in that both personally and systemically? And that's what I want to move into. The first thing that I would really continue to try to establish are reciprocal relationships with Indigenous communities, both in my own clinic and in general in here in the province in which I will be practicing. And that's very key because really having those professional relationships that can allow us to come together and make solutions are what's going to make these changes. And also, those changes will then be informed by the real cultural and socio-political practices that are needed to create the lasting impact in these communities. And also with that those reciprocal relationships can then be built into canvassing for really broad sociological changes. And that especially comes with access to infrastructure in rural communities that have been chronically underfunded. And if we're able to get that funding and bring doctors to those communities, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to really create that cultural scope where everybody is able to be seen and heard, excuse me. And also to build on that level of being seen and heard for those non-Indigenous practitioners, the province in which I'm inhabiting has created a great initiative where Indigenous health collaborators are able to come into clinics and act as cultural and linguistic translators. So that helps to ensure that even if there is a bit of a language barrier or a cultural barrier, those resources can come together to make change for everyone. And I think that overarching theme really relates to a very cool concept that I've been learning about called two-eyed seeing. And that was developed by Elder Albert Marshall out of the Eskasoni First Nation of Nova Scotia in conjunction with other researchers. And it really discusses that importance of combining the Indigenous perspectives of medicine and Western perspectives of medicine together to create beautiful outcomes for everybody involved. And that's really the framework that I would wish to align myself with and help to bring to these healthcare resources. And this is going to be something I'm really going to be looking to do as I move into my career as a physician, especially working in areas with higher levels of Indigenous populations or in rural areas. And I think that's very, very crucial to one, acknowledge that culture, the previous paradigms that have created today's culture, be humble in that culture, see people for their stories, and also work reciprocally for systemic change. So, with the little bit of time we have left, do you have any follow-up questions for me on this matter?
Thank you very much. Um, what do you think are some of the weaknesses of the current Western evidence-based medicine?
That is a excellent question to examine. And are you asking in context of care for Indigenous populations or just everybody in general?
Everybody in general.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. I think one thing that what evidence-based Westernized medicine could do a bit better is really encapsulating the spirit of the person that it's treating. Western practice is very, very skilled at looking into pathologies and epidemiology and disease patterns, But sometimes, at least from my own sometimes personal experiences working as a volunteer in the QE2 emergency department, it can miss the emotional side of things and doesn't always acknowledge the traumas and fears that people come with that are unique and might not be seen. So sometimes just focusing on disease and epidemiology can make a bit of a one size fits all model. But when we combine that with that investigation of the person's spirit and experience, we create that comprehensive level of care. And that's what I aspire to. So thank you very much for the follow up and have an excellent day. Thanks so much. Good evening. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Atlas Example Student. I use he, him pronouns, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be conducting this interview. Now, the prompt I've been presented with is asking me to describe a conflict I had while being part of a team and my role in that situation. So, to really explore what this looked like for me and also the lessons I've been able to take away from that experience and build towards my future practice as a physician, I want to tell a series of stories. And those stories will revolve around a time that I was working with a diverse group of people with very busy schedules to create a lab for my Intro to Neuroscience class, the lessons I took away, and how those related to a research project I'm currently working on for a wilderness EMT session in the Canadian Ski Patrol, and then how that relates to the way that I hope to practice team building and conflict resolution in my career. So let's move back to the beginning. Let's set the stage and take ourselves back approximately 2.5 years. And during this time, in my third year of undergraduate studies in neuroscience, I was part of a very cool class that allowed us to act as TAs for Intro to Neuroscience, which is the first year course that everybody who wants to major in that subject must take to be able to graduate. Now, in this area, we were tasked with creating a lab for all 600 of those students to create, and we had approximately a week and a half to do so. So already our time budget was quite constrained. And to add to this, I was working with a very diverse and busy group of people who all came with excellent stores of different ideas and perspectives. We had one person who was actually a father of two kids. One person was really gunning their way to be an ophthalmologist. At least that's what their dream was. And another was a psychology student who was really good at running track. And with those come a very busy schedule. And what ended up happening is we finished almost all of our work on the deadlines in which we were supposed to, but then we had realized that there was a technical glitch with one of the lab exercises we were running when it came to the data input. So our Excel sheet wasn't calculating the addition statistics properly, and that was really unfortunate. But what the key was here is that every single person had a commitment that night that they needed to follow. And conflict about who was going to really manage this soon ensued as we all had different skills that we needed to call upon to make sure that this was going to be fixed. And how I was able to, really call upon that was through a creation of a space for open communication. And as the appointed team lead and organizational lead, that was my job and responsibility. So I knew it was crucial to make it happen. And it might seem like a very stressful thing to do, but I needed to really foster that communication and collaboration between all of us to ensure the product got out, not just for the sake of our grade, but for the sake of all the students who are relying on us to pass this class. And that's something that's really key. And to make that happen, I called upon something I dubbed the art of being with. And what that really relates to is even when people are in, stark conflict and, they're in that fight or flight response, we take a minute to pause and calm our nervous systems down to open ourselves to compassionate communication that reestablishes the fact that, hey, we're on the same team and we got this together. And of course, these people are my friends and we care about each other. We've gone through this degree together. We're in the same class. We know that we have that connection to really build upon and make a future for this project that works for everybody. And luckily through that, that's what we were able to do. We were able to get everybody to divvy up their required assignment parts in a calm and collected way, and then get that Excel sheet fixed that night, and then submit it 2 days later to a great success, and we got an A+ on the project, which was really, really awesome. But calling upon those emotional lessons of creating open spaces for communication and knowing that we have that shared goal really helped me in another situation that happened just a couple weeks ago where I was working on a project for the Canadian Ski Patrol, which focuses on winter wilderness rescue up in the hills of the province that I'm living in. And really, what we're trying to do there is bring in the use of a new drug, and it's called Penthrox. And current ski patrol practice for our clinical scope doesn't let us prescribe pain medication. But really being out in the winter and seeing people suffer through the pain of broken bones or hitting hard objects like trees at high speed, really convinced me that change was needed. And this project is a step to implement that change. Now, the team that I am working with here are all, funnily enough, in professional settings and all about 20 years my senior. So the youngest person in this group is at least 40 and all working full-time jobs, some as physicians, some as infrastructure technicians or things of that nature, and also managers. But with all their busy schedules and conflicting responsibilities, I was really able to call back upon that art of being with again and having those individual talks about what's most important to them to see the evolution of patient care at our ski hill and how we can facilitate that together. And through that, and then through a group meeting after all that, we really found that despite the stress and the schedules and the policies that might be in our way, we all have that same goal and we see that same future for this project. And I was very luckily able to facilitate that for us. And I was only able to do that because of the lessons I was able to pull in from that time in the neuroscience lab. And just combining all of that together is really going to influence the way that I move forward in the world as a future physician, as I'm going to be interacting with many different types of multifaceted teams with various perspectives, schedules, and responsibilities. So whether I'm calling in a consult from a different physician, educating students or residents, or coordinating with the nursing staff or even patient transporters and things of that nature, these skills are going to be very crucial to call back upon again and ensure that I create that team connection to know that we all have that same goal, and that is excellent patient care. So with those in mind, do you have any further questions about how I would, go about solving conflicts such as these?
Thank you. Can you tell me a time when you were unsuccessful in solving a conflict?
Sure. I think a time when I was unfortunately unsuccessful in solving a conflict happened during another research venture in a literacy lab, and that was also due to my development of neuroscience learning. What ended up happening here is that my scope of practice wasn't super clearly defined, and that ended up being the case just due to again the conflicting schedules that happen between the varying levels of lab personnel, and that was something I had to keep in mind. And there was a manuscript I was working on as part of a side project. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to really even contact my faculty advisors in that case because one was taking a research leave, time to study in Europe, and the other went on maternity leave. So I was essentially left stranded because of their personal responsibilities with no way to unfortunately finish this manuscript. But what I was able to do is instead of fostering communication, which was unfortunately impossible as their phone lines weren't working and the email wasn't working, I took agency instead. I tried my best to work with all of the stakeholders who were present in that lab and get the manuscript to the best place it possibly could have been before they returned back from their, various leaves. And then we were able to come back together to then continue to work on that and hopefully eventually move it toward publishing. So I appreciate that follow up and hope you have an excellent day. Good evening. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Atlas Example Student. I use he, him pronouns and want to thank you for taking the time out of your likely busy night to be conducting this interview. Now, the prompt I've been presented with is discussing a situation where I am involved in a 1 year job review check in with my manager. And during this meeting, my manager says that I'm, quote, not meeting expectations, and this is putting me at risk of being on probation or fired, and how I would handle that. Now, before I really delve into the courses of action I would take, I want to just quickly summarize the actions that feel to me most appropriate. And the first pillar of that would really talk about my emotional response, both in that moment and the self reflection needed, then move into an examination of the power dynamics that are in play, and then moving into more information gathering and actionable solutions, and then how the learnings from these two facets really will relate to the way that I move through the world as a physician. So, with those things in mind, let's circle back to the beginning. In this meeting, the first thing that really calls to my importance is remaining calm. I'm already in a situation that can be very, very emotionally heavy and taxing, and also where it might appear that the manager is ready to either enact a certain punishment by putting me on probation or laying off. And I can't assume that directly, but it's the safest option for me to maintain strong professionalism and a calm demeanor in this meeting to show that I, have the ability to emotionally regulate in tough situations like this one. Now, another thing I need to keep in mind too is who else is in this meeting? Am I being publicly embarrassed in front of a committee, or is it just me and this manager here? Because that is going to inform my future approach. So let's keep that in the back pocket for a little bit later. Once I am able to remain calm and finish off this meeting, I really need to take some time for radical self-reflection. And that's going to involve me likely distancing myself from the situation, continuing to make sure my sympathetic nervous system is calm, and asking what was underneath this and what things have I maybe done or not done in this scenario that has prompted the manager's reaction. And that's something I really need to delve into to have that groundwork to make an accurate picture of the next ways in which I should be moving through this scenario. Now, before I take any further steps outside of outside of self-reflection, I want to acknowledge the emotional weight of a situation like this and the consequences it can have. It's incredibly stressful when someone really tells you, frankly, that not doing well at your job, as you have that sort of personal guilt to, not meeting the expectations of a team that you might possibly really care about and have great friends and also future aspirations towards in the company. But also the realization you might not be able to, have the money to pay for your basic needs or those that rely on you for their needs. So there's that stress that weighs through a scenario like this one we really ought to keep in mind, at least in my perspective. Now, the way that I would continue to move forward with this revolves a bit around power dynamics too. I really need to keep in mind that this manager does have the power to, put me on probation and or fire me, but also has the power to network with other people in managerial positions and, possibly spread either information, good or bad, either way, about what I do here to new jobs I might apply for. So that's something to keep in mind as well, and also levels of professionalism and respect for those that have earned, their place in the organization. With that in mind, I would then move into talking to people who are on my same level of either prestige or work scope. And that would ensure I don't violate any professional boundaries by either, seeming that I'm griping to people below me on the hierarchy, which is unprofessional, or going upwards and risking retaliation. And once I'm done that, I would really look to see if people in my similar area have had that same experience. Do they find that they're being possibly discriminated against by the manager? Are there any qualities that I have that maybe I might be, in this case, of a marginalized position or have brought up views the manager doesn't like that could be discriminated against? Those things need to be examined. And depending on that, I would then, possibly schedule a meeting with this manager again to really discuss what was going on. But if I was found to be in more a position of discrimination or danger, I would likely use the human resources route and go through the way of anonymous reporting. And this really protects me from that, imbalance of power that I just referenced in the last part of the answer. And I think that's really key. Is just the fact that I'm able to, professionally go about this while also ensuring that my well-being is kept safe and also the well-being of other people in the company is these things can start chain reactions and rumors that can be unsubstantiated, and I don't want to unjustly involve my coworkers or colleagues in these matters as to put their job position in jeopardy as well. Now, circling back to that, if the meeting that I had in person went well, perhaps we could implement a performance improvement plan or something of that nature to ensure that I don't need to be put on probation or be laid off because of the consequences of, losing my funds and also the team that I've built relationships with, as previously mentioned. However, if human resources is involved and it's found that that discrimination, does really come up or something of that sort, it may be best for me to, either part ways with that company for one to provide a safe work environment or work to the best of my ability to foster that culture for everybody involved. Because we all have a responsibility to create workplaces that are open and allow people to feel seen, heard, and understood to do their best possible job. And it's my belief that fostering these open and healthy workplaces is a huge, huge facet of what is going to make me a strong physician in the future. And that actually speaks to the expansion of the CanMeds roles, funnily enough, as in 2026 they are implementing a new pedal to the flower that really talks about the humanization of physicians and having a psychologically safe workplace. And I think that relates directly to this and is something I really wish to embody and value as I move into the world of medical practice, both for my team and colleagues as well as my patients. So, with those things in mind, do you have any further questions about how I would handle this stressful situation with the 1 year job review?
Yes. What do you think lessons you could learn from this for your future work as a physician?
That's an excellent question. And I think the main lessons to really distill from this are the importance of open, empathetic communication and respecting power structures and professionalism. And I'll quickly delve into both. The importance of empathetic communication is especially pertinent in areas of medicine, as that job is one that can be very, very emotionally heavy and sometimes stressful. We have very important outcomes riding on our shoulders and also many conflicting responsibilities, whether that be running to get tests, doing new consults, speaking to families, and balancing all those with open communication between people one allows us to be efficient, but two allows that team camaraderie to exist and knowing that we've got each other's backs when things can go kind of haywire and that real team approach is there for everybody to move forward. The second part, though, is really about respecting those power structures, as people have, especially in medicine, put in their time, diligence, and expertise to, really create and perpetuate knowledge and strong actions of treatment. And respecting those things and also protecting ourselves from the abilities of retaliation are very, very important, as that really helps to create that first item of open communication when we're all able to work together and respect the work that we've put in for each other. So, with those things in mind, I want to thank you very much for your time and have an excellent day. Thanks again.
Thank you.